Hello and welcome to the E-Commerce Braintrust. I'm Jordan Ripley, Director of Retail Operations at Acadia and co-host of the show. We'll be back with brand new episodes next week, but for this first week in January, we're re-releasing one of my personal favorite episodes from 2024. Today's episode features an interview with Merchant Spring founder Paul Sonneveld and goes deep into many of the topics that honestly we expect to shape the industry throughout the entirety of next year. Things like building software for the long tail of retail media networks, putting the customer at the center of your product design, and ultimately how to focus on the things that really move the needle in an industry that we all know is rife with shiny distractions. So if you missed this episode this past year, give it a listen to start off this next year with a leg up on the competition, and enjoy.
This is the E-Commerce Braintrust, a podcast about building momentum online for established consumer brands. Join our hosts and their expert guests for high-level conversations about e-commerce strategies, trends, and innovations. Access our brain trust and boost your brand's e-commerce potential.
Welcome to the E-Commerce Braintrust podcast. I'm Julie Spear, Head of Retail Marketplace Services at Acadia. And today I'm joined by two special guests. The first is Paul Sonneveld, CEO, co-founder of Merchant Spring, a reporting and analytics platform for marketplace channels that we here at Acadia have used and loved for years now. We're very, very avid fans of Merchant Spring. You're a bit of a celebrity coming onto the podcast, Paul. And we also have Jordan Ripley, who is Director of Retail Operations, and he oversees the tech stack that we use within the retail team at Acadia. And he might be the president of your fan club. Sorry if I'm outing that, Jordan.
It's guilty. Yeah, no,
He might be.
I deserve to be added.
Well, I'm excited to have both of you on so we can chat through when to build software versus buy at an agency and SaaS company, how to use customer feedback to shape what you deliver to the market, and where we see the industry headed in this multi-channel e-com world. So we have just a few things to dig into. Welcome, Paul and Jordan.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie. Absolutely great to be with you. And thank you so much for your kind words. Really appreciate it. Thank you for being a great customer for many years already. So thank you.
Well, the value that Merchant Spring adds to our team and to our clients is sets you up well to receive our fandom. So I'm not an affiliate of Merchant Spring. I will go on the record. We just really enjoy the tool.
Excellent. Maybe you should be talking about it.
Yeah, we could talk after if you'd like. All right. Well, let's dig in because we do have a lot of ground to cover. And I know Jordan's itching to get started with some of his questions, but I'm going to start with a couple of my own. We all know in this space that we see kind of blurred lines between agencies and managed service providers and SaaS as managed service providers, and then SaaS solutions that have managed services. Lots of tech companies really try to develop managed service teams. And then there's the flip side where agencies have invested a lot of time and effort into developing their own proprietary tech. At Acadia, we have a strong stance on this. We've always seen ourselves as focusing on what we're best at, which is being partners to our clients and focusing on the managed services aspect, and then investigating as much as we can to find best-in-class services from a SaaS perspective. So that's why we're huge believers in Merchant Spring. But Paul, I'm really curious to know more about your journey with developing Merchant Spring, since you started first as an agency and then you pivoted into SaaS. Can you kind of walk us through what drove that decision and how you were able to successfully pivot? Because I think that makes you a bit of a unicorn.
I think there's another criteria for unicorn, which is like $1 billion in sales or something like that. Which, we're like super close, but just, a few more digits.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. It sort of brings back a lot of memories the moment you asked that question. You're absolutely right. I mean, we started as an agency back here in Australia. The context really was that Amazon was entering the market here in Australia. I think, I can't remember the exact year. I'm going to say 2017, but I could be off by a year or so. And it was an exciting time because there was sort of all of a sudden a new opportunity for brands out there to sell their products. But in response, a lot of other marketplaces, or a lot of retailers, I should say, and let's be correct, decided to jump on the whole marketplace bandwagon as well. So for a country like Australia, which is probably about 1/15 the size of the US population-wise. Literally within the space of 6 months, we had about 6 or 7 different marketplaces open their doors, including Amazon. From a kind of needs, underlying customer needs, it was a really exciting time because brands at the time really struggled to drive growth within the traditional retail sector, and e-commerce was pretty much the only growth channel. And within that, marketplaces were growing really fast. So great opportunity, but literally no skills base at all in Australia. So we decided to jump in and open up one of the first marketplace agencies here in Australia. Now, at the time, we didn't even call it a marketplace agency or a full service Amazon agency or anything like that. I don't even know what we called ourselves at the time. I think we worked it out later. But we started on that journey, and we were quite successful at the start in terms of acquiring new clients. So when Amazon went live, I think we went live with about 12 clients. Then we run into our first problem, which is, I think Amazon launched in December. We all came back from the beach in January, being Australian and all that. And we looked at our sales figures and we go, oh, a couple of $100 per client. How are we going to justify invoicing the amounts we said we would invoice and pay for everything? So that was a challenge for us openly. And we very quickly did our first pivot, which is we're going to go multi-marketplace. So we had eBay here at the time in Australia. We had a couple of Miracle-based marketplaces, and we had to pivot very quickly. We came away from our strategic workshop, and this is the right thing to do. It was almost like, this is the only way we can have a sustainable business. We need to do multiple things, multiple marketplaces. So that worked. And I think within a few months, we had I think the metric we looked at was like 3.4, meaning the number of channels that one client was trading on. That was interesting. But then, of course, different marketplaces drives enormous complexity in your operational model. So all of a sudden, we're managing Amazon listings, we're managing eBay listings, we're managing offers on Miracle marketplaces and all of that. They all have different backends, different terminology, and also became really hard to keep tabs on what things are doing. None of this was automated. We had a team offshore that we gave the job of every day logging into the back end of every single account and do 3 checks. 1, what were the sales? 2, what's the inventory position? 3, are there any issues on seller health? Are we about to get suspended or not? Those were the checks, and they did that very diligently until I think it was Boxing Day or the day after Christmas where one of our Amazon accounts got suspended. And we just missed it. And this was a client, so this was really, really bad. And like this whole model, A, we're driving a lot of complexity in our business, and B, we're just not close enough to it. We're not on top of what's happening with all of our clients, and we can't ask other people to check it. We just don't get that quickly enough. So it was a bit of a wake-up call. So I called up a good friend of mine who's much more tech-oriented than I was and I am to say, I need your help. We need to do something. Within the space of about 2-3 weeks, what he built for us is version 1 of Merchant Spring, which will never be shown publicly because it's probably the ugliest UI out there, but it did the job. It was essentially one HTML table or one-page application, one HTML table with clients along the side, sales, inventory positions, and seller health. But the beauty of it, it was multi-marketplace. So it was across Amazon, eBay, and the like. That's sort of how Merchant Spring was born. It was really born as an internal tool to manage and stay on top of our business. That was kind of the big birthing process of Merchant Spring. If I sort of fast forward, and we can go back and revisit some of these points later, but just to sort of round out the question, we continued to invest in the platform initially as an internal tool, but we found that other people started getting interested in the platform. So we decided to invest, and also we had an agency business that was generating quite a bit of cash. So we invested a lot of that cash into developers, into things. We started building out the platform. And at some point, we started to sell it externally. But this is where our business really started to grow apart. All of our clients for Merchant Spring were based in Europe, based in the US. They're largely agency owners. We'll talk about that more later. All of our clients in terms of our agency in Australia were brands based in Australia. And you could sort of see it became really difficult serving 2 different types of customers and trying to really grow 2 different businesses. So to cut a long story short, we decided at some point, we said, look, which one's more interesting? Let's pick that one and really go in. The last thing we want to do is fail at 2 businesses. Let's pick one and do it well. So we decided to do the SaaS business, obviously, as you can deduct. And I think the other added benefit that came with it is because we're dealing with agencies, a lot of agencies, and I'm seeing that now as I talk to others, they are very reluctant to adopt any form of software that is owned by another agency. There's always this thought about, okay, I'm basically giving another agency access to my client's data, and they could sort of shortcut me and cut me out of that. And even we find that I've heard that topic with sort of other tech providers that have managed service components to it as well. We decided to be really clean, focused on SaaS, and that's our core business. And I think we sort of made that decision about 3-4 years ago.
So you hit on part of your answer brought me back. I had a moment of just nostalgia with the logging into every account, doing manual checks for these key metrics. That's actually how I got my start in this world of doing the back-end checks on manual checks across all accounts back in 2015. So you brought me back with part of your answer there. But you quickly pivoted to creating the tech solution. And I quickly pivoted to searching for the tech solution, which is a good segue into my next question, because we are talking about a decade now of this industry being what it is, with the number of retail media networks and the marketplaces that brands can sell on. And with that has come the rise of the SaaS industry, that the third-party solutions that support those platforms. Can we even count the number of retail media networks? But I think also the software solutions to support all those platforms is vastly abundant. So you are in a very competitive space from my perspective. What would you say, how have you kind of identified and carved out your niche within a very competitive industry? And how do you kind of stay true to what your niche is? What's your practice for remembering who you are as Merchant Spring compared to all the other solutions out there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Let me sort of give you the headlines, and then we can go a bit deeper into some of those. I think the thing that makes us unique, at least the way I'd like to think about us, is that we really focus on agency needs first. Or let me clarify that. Those that manage multiple accounts across Amazon and potentially other platforms as well. So one of the big things for us is, we spoke about this early days, this ability to look at an entire portfolio of channels. That's our starting point, and that's still true today. The second aspect is really around multi-channel. So yes, of course, we reflect the nature of the market. So a lot of our functionality is Amazon focused, but we do fill in all those other gaps as well, whether it be Walmart or eBay or Shopify. In our game, I'm finding that you need to meet 90 to 100% of the need of an agency. If you do 70%, that means you're forcing them into another solution somewhere else. So that's a very sort of clear piece. And I don't see many software tools do either of those, so the multi-channel aspect or the agency aspect. What I am seeing is a lot of tools that are geared towards individual Amazon sellers, or at least were built there. That was their DNA. So they were sort of a one Amazon store type tool trying to turn into an agency platform. But the difficulty that you've got at that point is you're kind of stuck into a certain way you've architected your application. And you can sort of bend your UI in a certain way, but you never have that same starting point. And probably the same can be said for the sort of multi-channel aspect as well. And I will go deeper into that in terms of how do you homogenize data and how do you have the right starting point. The other thing that I think is interesting to talk about is we try and shy away from going too deep with Amazon and Amazon alone, because we've seen great examples of it, even in the last year, where Amazon is rapidly scaling up their own functionality inside Seller Central or Vendor Central. And those tools that have done a great job in serving a particular Amazon need, I worry for them. They may not be around. For example, we can all see Amazon investing pretty heavily in retail media or in its own tools. For sure, at least this is my prediction, in the next few years, we're going to see much better tools on the Amazon side to run your campaigns and do all those things, which presents an issue for those platforms that have focused on the PPC side of things. And that's just one example. So yeah, we're trying to really stick to the omnichannel theme, agencies first. And within that, probably our third theme is around feature parity. So it's easier said than done. But how do we make sure that the other channels, things like Walmart, they have the same profitability module in Walmart as we have for Amazon? We try to do that and continue to invest in making sure we take away the pain and the friction of having to switch between different channels. That is, trying to make it homogeneous within the app to save our customers time.
That's great. Might hop in here. I am interested. You mentioned the idea that going too deep in Amazon presents risk because they might develop that feature internally and all of a sudden you lose all the value around it. And it reminds me of Google, like in early days of managing Google, there are all these third-party tools that you could use to use it. And now I think there are just a couple left because so much of what Google management is automated by Google. And I think Amazon is following a similar path with that, but a lot of the other channels are way behind, which gets me to the point of like, as the product owner, you have all of these potential features that you could build. And I'm curious, as someone on the agency side, we want to understand, do we invest in this service versus that other service? And you have a similar idea of like satisfying your end customer with the features you invest in. And so what sort of criteria, is there a certain methodology that you use of, do we go deeper into this channel? Do we try to build feature parity across all of these channels? Do we launch an entirely new feature suite? Like, how are you prioritizing those things internally?
Yeah, we're sort of an agile methodology. So we're split things up into sprints, but it's useful to think about how do we allocate resources for an upcoming sprint. Typically, what we try and do is we will think of it as 3 different goals we want to achieve, or think of it as a third when it comes to resources and developers and the like. 2/3, what we try and do is to work on roadmap items. And I'll talk a little bit about that is. The other third is more around kind of quality of life. And let me explain kind of both things. The roadmap pieces are, I would say, the big building blocks that are really informed by our strategy. For example, this year, we have a big sort of our strategic theme is really around feature parity, around profitability and retail media. As a good example, we're working on, from a profitability point of view, obviously we have Walmart, we have Amazon, a few others, but there's a lot missing. So we have building blocks to try and fill that in. A very practical example right now is we're working on Amazon vendor profitability. That's a missing piece. We need to put that in. That's in line with our roadmap. And similarly on the retail media side, we're about to launch Google Ads. We'll probably get onto Facebook after. We've recently done TikTok. So we're building out those. So those are part of our strategic roadmap. And we have a clear line of sight of roughly what's coming and what's the order in which we're going to do it. Now, there's always like things are delayed that we can speed up and you do hit roadblocks, but that really is driven by our strategy. And there may be, for example, some more enterprise type features in there as well, like API gateway or security, or there might be some other building blocks. So that's really driven by our roadmap. And the roadmap we probably revisit once or twice a year. There's always shuffling, but kind of the building blocks remain fairly static. And a lot of those building blocks are, how do we get to the roadmap? It really is around 2 questions around how do we serve our existing clients better, not just because we want to be nice people, but also how do we make them even more sticky than they already are? And the second question is really around what are the client segments that maybe we're not a great fit for right now, but how do we increase our product market fit with those other segments? That's sort of the strategic lens on that. The quality of life aspect, that's really around how do we make our application much better to use? And this segment is 100% driven from customer feedback. We can go into more depth, but because we operate in the agency space, we're not like a helium-10. We're dealing with tens of thousands of, probably more, millions of customers. We work with a couple of hundred agencies, and that means between our account team, which is about 4 or 5 people now, we have good relationships with most of those. Jordan, you'll know, we probably talk at least once every 6 weeks or so. We'll talk about product features and feedback. That serves to me as a great funnel to take all that back. And then the hard bit starts, which is what's kind of like crazy ideas versus actually that's just a brilliant idea and 5 other people have asked for it and we just go away and do that. So that's what we call the quality of life bit. Always make it easier and really act on feedback from our customers.
I think those conversations contribute well to Jordan's quality of life because I know he walks away Those are some of his favorite calls.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when they get built. That's one of the, the ultimate thing.
Yeah. No, but it's a win-win, right? Because the time to talk to me, if you believe that I can make your life better, right? These are generally not just random ideas, but hey, Paul, if your product could do this, myself or my team would be saving another hour here, or can have another conversation with a client that may lead to a further commercial conversation. Who knows? But it's always driven. What I like about it, there's a genuine need and pain point behind every single conversation. And that's what kind of motivates us trying to solve those.
I mean, that leads to the stickiness. That's how you're showing like you're listening to your customers, the agencies, and understanding how to develop and deliver features that meet their pain points and needs. So the stickiness increases and Jordan's happy. We're all happy. It's
one takeaway from the day.
You hit on this earlier when you were talking about homogenization of data and Merchant Spring as a multi-channel tool. We all know, I'm here to state the obvious, that with all these retail media networks, there's a major pain point in brands needing to assimilate the data across all those channels and how you really can measure success when the definition of a metric and actually the naming of products themselves, product identifiers, it varies across channels. And Merchant Spring being a solution that sits in the middle and across so many of those platforms, how do you approach building the platform in such a way that you can homogenize the data across those channels?
That's a great question. And that's probably one of the hardest things to solve for in the game that we are in. I would say that we've been very fortunate to sort of be at the right place at the right time, or maybe with the right set of circumstances. And what I mean by that, unlike our US counterparts or competitors, depending on how you look at them, they've always operated in a market where Amazon was so dominant. So naturally, they have built things for Amazon, right? And probably haven't paid that much attention to homogenization because I think for many years, most people wouldn't even talk about Walmart as a number two. If you know what I mean? There was such a gap, such the distance. Because we sort of grew up here in Australia, when we started, actually eBay was the largest marketplace, followed by a Miracle marketplace, followed by sort of a retailer that had a completely homegrown platform, followed by Amazon. Of course, the situation has completely changed now, but that was our starting position. But we knew that Amazon was going to grow. So before we built anything, because we're faced with these variety of data sources, different metrics and the like, we were actually forced to do that hard work up front to say, okay, we've got all these other data sources. What is the data schema we're going to come up with where all these different channels are going to fit in? We're very lucky in that our circumstance forced us to think about that question long and hard before we started building anything. That's so much easier once before you're committed into a certain data structure, because that becomes way harder. So we're very fortunate in that. The other thing that I would say is before we build out any new channels, whether it be kind of e-commerce channels or retail media channels, we go through quite a detailed technical evaluation where we essentially make a series of test calls to the API. We understand the nature of the data that comes back, the structure, and we work through how that maps into our internal structure. And certainly in the early days, we had to sort of make some further amends to our internal structure. But what we're finding now is most times it will fit quite neatly because we've sort of come across a lot of different use cases already. So that works. I think the third point I would make is we sort of have a two-tiered data pipeline, simplistically put. So we sort of our data flows through two different databases. The first database, we literally store the data as is, the way it comes from every single marketplace. So it's not homogenized at all. It's just essentially raw data and documents. And then we have a process whereby we take that data and we homogenize it into a much more of a SQL type database with common data structures. We do have that two-tier piece for a variety of reasons, but that model has served us very well over the years.
That's interesting. It's something like there's a sort of broader application of that two-tiered data stream where you're storing the data in one place and then homogenizing it in another, where we've explored a lot of things with this sort of like clean room developments that they've had of we store client data, but then how can we unify it with other channels? And so it's something that it seems like Amazon is just now catching up to, but that you've built from day one. So it's, again, the right circumstances at the right time. It's nice to not be completely slaves to the incumbent channel there. One thing that I was curious about, like you have such passion about the product as the product owner, I'd love to hear things that you've built that you feel like this was the most gratifying or one of the most gratifying things we built. And then perhaps the other side of that of like things that you felt really good about on day one and then just sort of spiraled from there and maybe you brought to market or had to kill eventually, and just some of the glory stories and the horror stories too. It would be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for context, I have a bit more of a sort of consulting analytical background. So I get excited about analytics and data. As a broad theme, I get really passionate when we can take the raw data from a marketplace and do something interesting with it, as in derive new insights from that data. As opposed to, like, I'll give you a great example. We recently developed our subscribe and save reporting. That's probably a feature I don't get too excited about, because really all we're doing is we're taking the data that Amazon already has and we're just putting it in a visual format. We need to do it because our clients are asking, I think including Acadia was asking for it, right? To me, that's just a hygiene factor and we need to do it. But when you get to things like customer lifetime value, that's for me gets excited, because we're actually calculating all of that ourselves. We are looking at all the customer orders, the identifiers, working through all the cohorts, and we can sort of put our own stamp on how do we think about lifetime value, how do we present it, how do we derive the insights from it. Probably very excited about that one. The other one that I was excited about for a long, long time, because I didn't see anyone do that, was the sourcing share analysis when it came to Amazon vendor. Right? So yes, we have these manufacturing data sets and we have the sourcing data sets. But actually, by combining them, you can actually make a couple of deductions. They're just that. But you can sort of look at those discrepancies between manufacturing and sourcing and work out, okay, what's Amazon doing? What's going on? Are they sourcing products from somewhere else, or they're taking some of your products and shipping it overseas, or doing something with it internationally? That, to me, is really interesting, because you won't get a hint of that anywhere inside Amazon Vendor Central, what's going on. Even up to that point, we're sort of forced to really work through that. A lot of agencies really even struggle to understand the difference between sourcing and manufacturing. What really is it? We've always thought about what are these different views. Taking something like that and trying to push really to that next level, to try and put some data points together to drive new insights, that gets me super excited. It does sometimes come at the risk of you build something that's super complicated and it's just really hard to explain. Admittedly, that sourcing share analysis is a piece that actually requires quite a bit of training to completely kind of wrap your head around it. It's not straightforward. There's always a risk of overcomplicating it. I have one example, that feature that I don't necessarily completely regret, but we overinvested an enormous amount of energy and effort, and that is our eBay item specifics. So if you've never connected an eBay account to our platform, you won't even see this functionality. But this goes back to probably the first few months that we launched. And remember, we launched in Australia and we had a very high eBay user base. I think it's sort of disappeared everywhere else, but in Australia, they still have a really high eBay user base. So we went pretty hard and deep on building out this eBay functionality, because the search algorithm for eBay was driven off this thing that eBay calls item specifics, which is essentially a fancy word for product attributes. Mm-hmm. So we actually built this really fancy interface which scan all your listings to tell you how much of these attributes are complete, how many of you are missing, how many actually are, you've got values in there, but you've got the wrong value that eBay doesn't recognize. So giving you like a nice visual of completion progress, and even building the interface to enter all those within our platform and to then sync them back. Beautiful piece of functionality. The UI was really nice, but guess what? There's very few eBay customers outside Australia. And given that's where 95% of our user base now is, I think we'd probably go for weeks without anyone using that feature. Yeah. And at some point, I hope there's none of our eBay customers listening to this podcast, but we may have to think about sunsetting it at some point.
Yeah. We'll promote it less heavily in Australia, clearly.
Yeah. That's right.
The 80-20 rule was not at play with that one so much.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because being isolated in Australia helped you in terms of not building entirely to Amazon, but that same thing is a double-edged sword of like, sometimes you just build the wrong thing because the market is different.
Yeah. Look, and at the time, we didn't have a lot of customers. So all of our ideas come from our customer base now, or talking to customers, including our roadmap, by the way. I think when we just started, it was, okay, what do we need as an agency ourselves? and what are the interesting ideas that Paul has dreamt of on his way to work this morning. Some of those ideas, admittedly, it pains me, but didn't turn out to be great ideas. I actually don't have the luxury of entertaining my own ideas anymore because the ideas that are coming at us from our clients, they're so much better, and there's a lot of them. So I spend most of my time trying to triage them and work out what should flow to the top versus what can sink to the bottom in terms of the ideas list.
Well, that's an excellent segue to my last question. What's next in terms of feature build out for Merchant Spring, both in the near term and looking further out based on kind of where you see things headed? Like you said, you can foresee Amazon ads and the automations in platform. It's down the road. So I don't imagine Amazon advertising management features as a big focus for Merchant Spring in the future. But what's on the near term and the long term?
I hinted at some of these. So, of course, from a functionality point of view, the big themes for us are retail media and profitability. Particularly as we find that clients are increasingly interested in the profitability aspect of the channels that they operate, particularly as costs like shipping and fulfillment costs and advertising costs are rising. So that's a big focus for us, including sort of going down the cross-channel comparison, not just at the channel, but let's take an ASIN or let's take a SKU. Mm-hmm. We want to be able to tell customers last month in July, what was your bottom line profit on Amazon for that SKU, and what did it look like on a per SKU basis or an ROI basis? How did that compare to your Amazon performance in the UK, for example? And how did that compare to your Walmart performance? So the ability to compare actually not just profitability, but general like sales performance, inventory velocity across channels, across countries for a particular client is a big focus for us around that. That's kind of a big theme. We're probably not talking long term, we're talking fairly short term on that. Retail media, I've spoken about. I think we will go much deeper into the analytics of it. Obviously, a lot of marketplaces are evolving. I would say we are covering the foundational information right now, but we can go so much further in that space. And of course, for us, there's always a geographic overlay as well. What's happening in South America? What's happening? Actually, we've got pretty good coverage in South America in terms of Mercado Libre and a bunch of other marketplaces. Amazon, of course, Walmart, it's there too. But big geography that we haven't touched at all is things like Southeast Asia. You have some really large platforms there around Lazada, Shopee, Tokopedia, Indonesia. Like there's a whole other market out there. The ecosystem there is not as developed as in North America, that's for sure. But we'll probably want to start placing some bets in there as well. Really sort of looking at that geography. And then we've been focusing pretty heavily on Japan as well. The Yahoo groups, yes, Yahoo is a big thing actually in Japan, and Rakuten as well, alongside obviously Amazon. So partially the game arena is trying to answer the question on a country-by-country basis to ensure that we've got that coverage and we can really support the providers that operate in that geography with their needs.
You're not at a loss for direction and plans of where you can focus development moving forward. And I know we'll be following closely. And I know Jordan will continue to be the voice of Acadia with our ideas and feedback on things as well, which, again, his favorite time when he can do that.
Yeah, excited for all the cross-channel stuff. That's really, really cool.
I really appreciate your time today, Paul and Jordan. I'm glad that you were here to join the conversation as well. And I look forward to connecting again down the road to see what's new with Merchant Spring. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Paul.
Absolutely. It was great to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Excellent. Me too.